Hello, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Pay or Cut Costs Through System Consolidation, presented by SmartComms and Fierce Healthcare. I'm John, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. To learn more about our speakers today, just head to the speaker bio window on your screen. If you need to close one of these windows and reopen it, you can just click on its name on the top navigation bar. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be available on demand within 24 hours. And finally, there will be a Q&A session at the end. So if you do have any questions throughout the webinar, just enter them anytime in the Submit Questions window. All right, now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. John Zimmerer is VP of Healthcare at Smart Communications. Sarah K. Hermosillo is the Senior Director, End-to-End Member Experience Transformation at Blue Shield of California. And K.R. Prabha is VP of Strategy, Growth, and Innovation at Optum. All right, John, let's hand it over to you. The floor is yours.
Thanks, John. You know, we're here today because payers are experiencing even more pressure than usual when it comes to containing costs. You know, we have seen a lot of different payers report, especially those that are publicly owned, report medical loss ratios, MLRs, creeping past 93%. That is not a good place to be for a payer. We're also seeing it be a stretch for a lot of payers to address some of the new regulations that are going into place. Things like 1557, which is pushing requirements for accessibility and language translation. Many solutions that payers have in place and have had in place for years were really built around English-only sort of templates. Payers have always had some kind of a customer communication management solution. Usually there are multiple solutions. I know of one payer that has 12. That's a little out of the norm. Most are somewhere around 3 or 4, but still, every system that you have that does the same thing does nothing but multiply your costs and add complexity to your enterprise architecture and your processes. And we've seen that payers are more behind on customer experience than ever. Forrester has reported in their latest round of reports that of the 13 industries that they follow, I would sadly report that healthcare payers are now last. We used to be better than the government and airlines, not anymore. Oftentimes there are multiple supporting vendors that are in the mix. We've got print and mail, we have managed services. A lot of those costs extend beyond software and staff. The ability to make changes, get things to market quickly is often impeded by every third party that's in the mix. And of course, a lot of solutions are still on premise. Sometimes that is out of a stated choice for security concerns. I don't know that we can buy that any longer. I think it's a matter of it's hard for payers to justify shifting infrastructure into the cloud just because of the cost and the risk and the complexity of doing those. But there are ways to get to the cloud that will minimize disruption and lower costs. And so today, we're going to talk a bit about the pressures that payers writ large are seeing. We're going to talk a bit about what we've seen some payers do to try to mitigate costs. And then we're going to hear from Sarah K. To talk about how Blue Shield of California in particular is addressing these issues. So first, I'm going to invite Prabha into the conversation. And Prabha, you and your team work with not only the elements of United Health Group, but you also work with other payer organizations. And you all wrote an article not that long ago, where you were talking about some of the administrative costs and pressures. Can you highlight some of those for us today?
Absolutely, John, and thank you for the opportunity. And as you mentioned, yes, my group actually works with both our sister payer, if you may, which is United Healthcare, but also out in the commercial space as we think of it, with both with plans of multiple focus, right? Like whether it's regional, it's blues, it's mid-market or large multinational, sorry, multi-geography ones, if you may, right? And one of the things that we have found or we are hearing very strongly is there is a focus around thinking about administrative costs, right? How do we think about administrative costs? As you can tell, you shared before, the pressures are immense, but we believe that some plans may have cut too lean without
Mm.
changing the work that that they do. And so, in a sense, there's obviously a pressure around the employees who are currently doing the work. The processes are suboptimal. They are not enabled by technology in the right way to be able to you know, make the task better and more suited, almost like to top of license, as we call that in the provider side of the equation or the health side of the equation of doing the job that you're most qualified to do with the experience and skills you bring.
Gotcha.
And so, as we look at cross costs across the healthcare ecosystem within health plans, there's opportunities in every aspect of it. But John, looks like you want to say something. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I think you had identified a couple of things in your article, one of which was profit margins have been shrinking quite a bit. I think your statistics were an average of 2.2% in 2023 to only 0.8% last year. That's not a great trend. And you also highlighted that a good deal of non-medical costs are labor related. We've seen folks looking to implement automation and turn to AI to help combat the high costs of labor, not just to try to reduce FTE, full-time employee headcount. What else are you seeing payers contemplating for reducing that high labor cost?
Yes, so I think a few other levers that are in progress, but also can be examined more in detail are things like what is your fulfillment strategy, right? How much of it is still paper? And we know that the regulations and they vary by state and they vary by type of fulfillment. What I mean by that is letters, ID cards, AOPs, anything that gets sent out to the members and or sometimes even the provider partners can be re-examined. Again, that's one of the levers that most health plans take on and want to get through. However, there's always potential to relook at that lever and save money, and that's hard money, right? There's labor expense in there. There is postage in there. There's a delay in time of when the letter is sent but not received. So those are the things that can actually, digital can be a way to speed up that connection, make it a better experience, and also reduce cost. Again, it goes back to you have to transform the work to be able to reduce the labor or the human burden that goes into it. Some of the other things
100%.
that, yeah, go ahead.
No, 100%. We just published a blog article not that long ago where we were talking about, now is the time for payers to really double down and invest and innovate. And, in your article, you made a point about how admin expenses often limit the focus on strategic or operational priorities. I think we're going to hear from Sarah Kay in a bit that it's possible to do all of the above. It's possible to innovate. It's possible to improve member experience. It's possible to lower your operating costs when you focus on the right initiatives. And certainly that third party fulfillment aspect is a big piece. You also identified claims and billing and customer service as key areas. So can you tell us a little bit about how payers are looking at those three operational areas to save costs?
Yes, absolutely, John. I think like when we use levers around thinking about costs, administrative costs, especially think of it as stuff and staff, right? Like there's stuff you can remove. There are things that are redundant, there's load, and there's staff of how they do their work. So some of the other levers that you look at are especially around what we found from a third-party vendor, so third-party spend that health plans do. There's an average about 7 vendors, 2 to 7 is what we see, but you gave an example of 12 earlier when we talked about, I think. There are opportunities to say, how do you consolidate that spend to fewer partners, and then think about the contracting that you do with them such that there is more of an ownership of the outcomes that come through. So consolidation of the services, again, helps with fewer handoffs, right? Reducing manual work that goes with it, the management of these third-party spend and third-party vendors. I would also say a couple of other levers that we've actually been successful in working with health plans are around really how do you distribute the work? Where is the work distributed? And this is, I think a lot of it is in the back office function where it's most relevant, where things around claims, billing, and customer service around, do you have central functions? Are those distributed? Are they closer to the member base? Are they more central? What can be centralized versus globalized? How do you operate those functions such that there are fewer shadow organizations, there are few shadow roles, that you look at the bloat in it. Again, all of this I want to emphasize, you cannot go through and just cut down the number of people or the number of team members. You have to look at the work and say how the work can be transformed, which in a sense then frees up capacity and people, and ultimately investing them into more of the strategic initiatives or focus around transformations which are larger in scale than what they probably were working on. One other lever I would want to talk about is compliance, right? We know health plans integrate compliance within their business flows. Depending on the size and scale, they probably have a more formal, well-established office, or they seek help to do that. As we go through this, we were surprised when we found that some health plans actually go through over-compliance. That means they're doing more work to be compliant than maybe what the regulations require or the policies require, which again means that there's work that they are doing in an area which can probably be freed up in capacity and used elsewhere. And that was a surprising finding for us as well, as we've been working with some of the commercial payers, that we always seem to think that compliance means you do, like every organization is probably doing the best to bare minimum. It's not necessarily true. Organizations do more. And where the real return comes in is you're avoiding penalties by being compliant, but also then, ensuring that you are, if you're being over compliant, you're doing enough that you free up capacity. So you have savings and removing some of the work that you're doing, which you don't need to. But then the main, I would say, benefit of having a compliance office, and processes that support those things like payment integrity and others, help with avoiding penalties, help with avoiding overpayments, and really thinking about how do you make the operational workflows more effective and more connected, which ultimately I think focus on a member experience. It focuses on the provider experience where you don't go back and forth a whole bunch. And we can, instead of talking about it as cost reduction, we like to talk about it as more about how will it improve the effectiveness of the organization and how will it improve the experience of the people that the organization serves.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of yes and, right? We're seeing a lot of yes, that will help us reduce costs, and we'll gain agility, or we will be able to redeploy human assets or what have you. A great example, a customer of ours, I just got an email earlier this week that they completed a shift from running one of our key software assets, SmartCom, on premise to a full cloud implementation. And Yeah, there are some cost savings there because they're getting rid of at the end of the day they're going to shed something like 90 appliances that they have to run, manage, support. But really, what it did was free up those IT resources to go do higher value projects. And now we're having conversations with them and other payers. Actually, it's a very hot topic right now around consolidation of operations into more of a shared service, more of a center of excellence, because they do have still pockets of the organization that leverage our product, and they could further optimize by consolidating those operations. You've actually seen some real benefits from the organizations that you've worked with after implementing these strategies. You've got some great figures around efficiency increases and 5-year savings. And can you share some of those stats with us?
Yes, I will. And I'm going to have to refer to my cheat sheet here because I don't think I remember all those numbers off the top of my head.
When you do a lot of good work, you can't remember everything.
Exactly. AI is obviously front and center in everyone's mind these days, whether it's executives, it's business leaders, it's operators. And in one of the cases where we looked at digitization of contracts, when you think of the contracts that exist within a health plan, there are so many. Being able to consolidate them, apply AI capabilities to them, to be able to sort through some of the variation, identify the variance in there, and then enable the teams who are working on the contracts to then focus more on the reviews, on identifying what do you do with exceptions, or are there things that could be, were probably similar that could be consolidated. So really thinking about a contract intelligence hub, but also you extend that functionality to benefits. When you look at your benefits plans, being able to analyze them, bring out insights about how might there be a little more commonality or standards that could be applied to future products and future benefits being offered. And when you marry that up with consumer feedback around voice of consumer to say, what are the consumers asking? And are we presenting our benefits that align to that? So we have a case study where, there was about a 30 to 40% improvement when we talk about the work that goes under digitization of or analysis of benefits and contracts, if you may. But it was a combination of two things, right? It was the application of the technology, and then it was re-looking at the work that was being done to say what are the new jobs that need to be done in this space. The function doesn't go away, but the work that gets done is different. And I think 30 to 40% improvement is significant. Again, it's not overnight, right? You have to be able to identify these opportunities and lay out a specific plan that gets you there. But being intentional about it then helps build the right business case for executive sponsorship and then making it a transformation initiative within the organization. The other thing I would highlight is we had a national health plan that we worked with. A lot of the functions had been growing through acquisitions, and there was a possibility to say, how might we think about consolidating the various parts that we have acquired, even if it's the same business. When you acquire, new technologies come in, different skill sets come in, also just different processes that are in place. So going along with executive sponsors and business leaders, we engaged over 300 to 500 leaders across the organization to be able to talk across all functions within a health plan, right? There were about 10 some functions that we talked through, identifying areas where things can be sunset, things being platforms, technologies could be sunset, migrated over to common areas, and then really thinking about what else could you add on top of it from an AI standpoint or a modernization capability, supported with upskilling the team members. Those savings are very impressive. Obviously, it's a large health plan, so over a 5-year period, there's about 3.7 billion in savings that has been identified. Now is the good work, and this happened about year and a half ago. So the teams, the individual business teams, have a roadmap that they're following around realizing those savings and being able to transition and into a more modern organization.
Okay.
I have a few more, but I think two are great for now. We can add more as we continue the dialogue.
And I want to pull apart that last example. 3.7 billion is going to get anybody's attention, right? And everybody's going to nod and say, yes, we should absolutely do that. The reality, though, is that work has to get done to recognize those savings, right? And so when it comes to operationalizing that, what approach are you taking, or did you recommend that this particular payer take to be able to effectively end of life a bunch of different operations, end of life a bunch of different systems, and then shift into a new model? That can't happen overnight. You said 3 to 5 years, but how are they actually going to operationalize that?
Yeah, the short answer there, John, is we needed the executive owners of these functions to be championing the work and bringing the best of their teams to this new transformation. So it was a strategic commitment and a longer term advocacy and championship that absolutely had to be in place and is in place to do that. I would also say building the business cases for each business, right, around what is the work that is going to be changing or transforming, but what kind of investments do you need? So it's not a case of like you have to invest upfront in the prior first years to be able to transform the work. And then once you modernize, you start realizing savings. So it's that business case and being able to have a strong enough business case that our finance teams would be behind, right? The people teams would be behind, and the leaders would be behind and supporting is again another piece of really crucial success factor. On top of it, I think bringing in the SMEs, people who understand the workflow, people who understand the technologies, people who understand in depth how does a health plan operate or health plan function operate on a daily basis is very, very important. So I think by bringing in all these multifunctional capabilities and expertise to the project to be able to build the business case, then get buy-in, and then they get champions who are going to be leading their teams is a big part of the work, right? And that also helped them look at their next 1 to 3 year plans and say, what do we need to deprioritize in our original plan to be able to support this? Because we know the lift coming in from this transformation is a lot higher than if we were like continuing on our current path of transformation. So I think all of those aspects are important. So it's not just about, oh, I'm going to switch out the technology or I'm going to sunset this. There's a lot of organizational change management and leadership champions that have to be committed to this effort.
Okay, so two things. One, we've done some research. We engage regularly with payer industry analyst firms. That point about executive sponsorship is a crucial element to success. When we've analyzed projects, when the analysts have analyzed projects, the only ones that succeed long term are the ones that have executive, and I mean ELT level executive, not only buy-in, but involvement, right? It's a sponsorship. Yes. Because not in name only, it's active participation. And secondly, you made a point about the business case. Before we turn our conversation over to Sarah Kay, it's just you and me here. There isn't really a couple of hundred other people listening. Okay, so
of course not. Yes.
How much help? We'll put it that way. Did the payer need in building that business case from the standpoint of understanding their own cost drivers and gathering that data?
So I would say most operators that I have worked with, whether they're ELT level or more junior in the career, know the importance of knowing their business, knowing their metrics, right? Tracking to metrics, and understanding the cost of doing business. And I think not all health plans have that data available right away. So this is where ensuring that you have a strong finance partner, because it's all about when you think of the work you're doing. Let's just take a cost center or a customer contact center, right? What is it about? It is about the volume of calls or volume of work that comes in, and it's the cost of being able to support those operations, right? At the simplest level, we know there's all sorts of overheads and things like that. But at the end of the day, having those two pieces of information, right? Whether it's a plan with membership of 100,000 or 10 million, it's those two key pieces of information, and being able to have them with a high degree of confidence will enable to get the business case in a place where no matter who you're talking to, right? If you're talking to the owner of that business area or they're talking to their peers, once there is confidence from a number standpoint, finance, and the financial rigor that has gone into it, it gets accepted. But to your point of how difficult was it, in this case, like I said, being able to bring operators in and their financial counterparts who have strong relationships, getting to that answer was easy. It wasn't the same answer for each line of business, right? Mm-hmm. Some people were new in their role. Some people didn't have the kind of support from finance and HR that they needed. But it also highlighted for those departments and for those businesses the need to have those strong partners. So I think while the math is simple, the most important thing is getting the data right and at the right level, right? It may be you need to be able to figure out how much does it cost per minute to serve. And depending on how complex the operations are and how diverse the operators are, whether you have offshore operations, you have them spread across geographies. Again, this is the whole model of central versus distributed. How does that impact your costs, both in terms of assets and in terms of people and labor? And labor, we know, is a bigger part of the cost there. John, if I can take a minute, I know we're going to get to Sarah Kay, but I thought this example, a case study that I'd like to share, would be important, and it linked to her example. This is about digital, right? How do you use digital? And a lot of times, organizations find it hard to share the ROI around digital, right? And so it's like, yes, everyone understands you make something digital, the experience goes up, but how do you measure it, right? Yes, NPS is one way to measure it, but it's after the fact, and sometimes, too delayed to be able to work on it. There are things that you can do in the moment. One of the projects that we did, and it's part of the publication we had in there, was we noticed that for the contact center operations, when you looked at digital in NPS, there was almost a spread of about 100-point difference compared to regular NPS. So that was one where we said, okay, so firstly, the experience doesn't seem to be right, because we are investing, as in the company was investing in digital, right? In saying, okay, if you make things digital, if you go to self-serve, if you use other channels, it'll, one, improve the experience because that's what everyone expects, and two, it'll help us reduce costs. So in fact, the variation was so high meant that we were probably not achieving both goals. We weren't making the experience better, and we were probably adding more costs because we were going to have a lot more calls coming in because people couldn't find the answers they wanted to. So we analyzed about 200 million records in there to really think about like what are the root causes that are coming in, when are people calling in, and what's the variation across different lines of business. So two headlines. One is across all lines of business, of the top 10 reasons people called or people wanted to solve for, about 7 to 8 were common. So we know that there were certain basic things that needed to be solved. We also, when we looked at the data, we said, when there's a member calling, we assume that if they're calling and or going on the website and doing other things, within a 10-day period, it's for the same reason. Most likely, they may add one or two more. But when you look at the spread like that, that just shows the amount of work, whether it's through technology or through human, that was being done to solve for a problem that the member had. And our solution at the end was being able to analyze those journeys. We had a number of journeys we analyzed, and we said, on average, if you had 7 to 10 contacts in the 10-day period, what is the root cause? It's not the first thing that they do when they call or when they access the website. You have to look at the 10th, the 6th, 7th, 8th thing that they were trying to do. Why were they calling? And then going back on the website. And eliminating that work or the tail of work would be what reduces the number of calls coming in and the number of pings that you're getting, and then switching that first contact to be more effective and maybe a cheaper way to do it. If the first contact was a call, you could change it to digital, but you had to eliminate everything else that the member did by answering them in different ways or providing that information through their letters or whatever the cause was, before saying, I just switched to digital on the first one. And I think that goes back to my point of, you have to change the work, you have to transform the work before you realize the cost savings or you think the cost savings will come.
I'm wrapping my head around the fact that they had 7 to 10 contacts in a 10-day period. This was all around the same issue. That's a lot of repeat calls. That's a really poor first call resolution number. There's a lot of stats that are all kind of wound around that. When you did that analysis, were you able to identify the root cause? Like, were there clusters of reasons that people were contacting? Was it benefit inquiry? Was it a claim issue? What were the clusters of reasons that folks were calling into this particular call center that many times?
And again, they weren't calling all the time. Sometimes they were on the website, sometimes they were on the call. So the 10 contacts could be both in person and on. A lot of calls that come in, and this is common across many, many health systems, is identifying the provider. Sometimes the assigned PCP is not who they want to go to, so they want to try and find a provider. There's a lot of questions around benefits, right? Like what is covered, whether it's prescriptions or it's in a procedure that they want to go to. Also, like, what do I owe? Like, how do I understand my claim? So I think it's the top reasons are really finding me the right provider, like who's in my network, who's not, who can I go to, understanding my benefits, like what am I covered for? And then the third one is like, how do I read my claim and why was I denied, or what part do I have to pay when this is not what I expect? So I think those are the top 3 reasons. I will just leave it there. That shouldn't be any surprise. I think this is what every health plan experiences. There is work to be done to resolve it.
Yep. And I want to, before we turn it to Sarah Kay, I wanted to call out one other thing that Forrester has found, that for payers, when they analyze experience, digital gets the worst rating. Human gets the second highest. What's that leave? Well, the second place is hybrid, where members are able to mostly solve their issues via digital, or there's some sort of human interaction while using another channel. And so the temptation when folks hear, well, I can deflect calls around identifying the provider issue, I'll just give them a self-service widget and they'll make, not necessarily. Same thing around benefits. Really depends upon the question. We do have the technology today, though, to be able to train our AI on our actual policy documents and put a front-end agent or assistant that the member can interrogate, and then the agent knows, oh, you're John Zimmer, you have our silver policy. I'm going to pull that up and figure out, when you ask me a question, how I can answer it without engaging a human being. The technology exists. It's not perfect yet, but it's getting pretty darn close to be able to deflect a lot of those calls and to shrink 7 to 10 contacts to maybe 1 or 2. And that's one of the reasons why I really want to see payers think about innovating and leveraging not just AI for things like summarization or language translation, but maybe a bit more creative, maybe a bit more innovative application of that technology.
And John, I would
Robert,
say all that's correct. What is required is your data. I think there's a lot of things around data connectedness, data accuracy, which there has to be an investment in. It's foundational to make the technologies work better. So you can't have, fancy technology on top of a bad process and or inaccurate and disjointed data, because that actually makes the problem worse.
100%. Well, don't leave us, Prabha. You might be able to add some color to what Sarah Kay and I are going to talk about next. Sarah Kay is joining us remotely. That is, I think, a sign of how seriously Blue Shield of California takes their security. She can only join us by voice today. Sarah Kay, you definitely have a lot of experience around all the things that Prabha and I were just speaking about. You have a really interesting analogy that you like to use when thinking about evolution, and it's musically oriented. I'd love for you to share that with our audience.
Oh, of course, and hopefully you can hear me okay, John. Thumbs up,
Yes,
I can
ma'am.
see you, so hopefully, awesome. Apologies. I told him I even put a cute jacket on today, but that's okay. So I actually say that to really go digital, we have to do something that's in our soul. It's that thing that just makes our heads and our body kind of bop. Is we have to think of the music industry and what they really had to do to jump the curve from an analog to a digital state. The entire industry had to change. What were the new regulations? How do we ensure we don't have copyright, patent infringements, blah, blah, blah. Like the entirety of the industry was required to change. And in our industry, we've been chipping at it. I think a lot of us probably still have some 8-tracks buried in our on-prem systems that are so homegrown, so archaic. And then we have these like digital MP, like the best hit that we can have on either our Spotify or whatever. And those two things are working at the same time to run the foundation of a healthcare plan, which is kind of scary if you think about it. And I've been really lucky in my role in transformation. I come from a finance background, came from a member experience background as well, to say, how can you see financials in the brevity of the experience because you can understand the total cost? And I think that's really what the music industry had to do, is say there's a totality here. You have the artist, you have the label, you have the producers, you have the songwriters, you have the listener, you have everyone in it together. And here we need to think about the same thing. You have the payer, you have the providers, you have all the plans that you have to administer, you have all your groups, all your individuals, all your constituents, your regulators, your assembly, you have this rally of troops. It's not that different. But all of them had to sing, no pun intended, to the same tune and understand their sheet music together to really revolutionize everything that they had to do. So I like a good LP throwback, but that's different every now and then.
Well, you have a relatively unique role. I don't often see payers combine a role that is as much operationally oriented as it is member experience oriented. Prabha and I were talking about an example of 7 to 10 contacts to resolve an issue. To the dollar what each call and what each contact costs you. And I know that you're looking at ways to not just deflect these contacts, but to make them easier on the member, easier on the organization. We were talking earlier about, you're lucky to resolve a call in under 20 minutes because healthcare is so complicated. And you pointed out that the basics are broken. We don't understand the ways in which members are allowed to choose how they engage with the plan. Things like their ID card, their care plan. Can you go a little bit more into that line of thinking?
Of course. I mean, when you think about it, I started here at Blue Shield 16 years ago with I'll get in and get out. Healthcare is boring. It's a recession. Why not? Here I am still 16 years later because it is broken. And I am all about diving into solutions. And we're probably not unique. When we started, we're about 1 million or so members. Now we're nearly 5 million. And in that, you were very line of business segmented. So you built everything hub and spoke to that exact line of business. So if you think about this would be the music industry basically saying, hey, I have something for country music, something for rock and roll, something for R&B, something for jazz. Like, we did that. And we broke it all out, not realizing like the customer can listen to all tracks. And in here, the same thing is true. The harmony is the same. Our customers can, start in, some inherent life moment where they're in the Medi-Cal system and they need a different line of service. And then they land a job and they're part of a group plan. And then they can age into Medicare. We can have brokers that are our members. We have providers who are our members. We have everyone in this ecosystem, but we segmented it. We built the basics to say, what's to service that customer versus what is to service all customers. And that life cycle, that harmonization of the customer experience is what is broken. At the end of the day, a member is a member. A customer is a customer, a provider is a provider, a broker and employers are as they are such. So really making sure we find that harmony in the experience is the divide we have to get out of our own way. That's where the cost is too, because we stood them up in silos. Why do you need a segmented line of business to service a Medicare customer to then, to service a Medicare, you name it, right? And then imagine I'm a broker and I have a question on 2 or 5 different groups and plans and an individual that's in there too. And I have to jump around. Like, we have just made it, I'm always about the harmony. There's no harmony in the experience or consensus. And that's what I've broken down. John, the example I gave you is when I started here, we started with a compliance problem. No different than what Prabha was saying. It was like, this is non-compliant. This is broken. And we got under, we're like, oh my gosh, it's not only non-compliant, it's horrible. Like, I, as a customer, can't even understand this, and I feel bad. Like, how can you give someone an EOB that says this is not a bill, but give a bill that doesn't even say it's a bill, right? Like, how are these coherent experiences? How are we making sure that we can, give all things can be true? I can understand it. I can have good, solid sentiment with what my next best actions are. I can resolve whatever it is I need, and I can keep my care. And we had to do all those things by really walking through our members' shoes. And then the fun headway we hit is we got to Medicare. And Medicare was like in this analog, like, write us a check, model. And I'm like, guys, like, we just built this beautiful experience for IFP and Medicare Supplement where we have Apple Pay and Google Pay and all this beautiful stuff. And you're asking people who age into Medicare to write them a check. This makes no sense. Like, Comcast lets me keep my cable box if I move. Like, let them keep their wallet. Like, what the heck are we doing? This was 5 years ago. And everyone just assumed, like the ageism ways, oh, they're Medicare. And I was laughing because my MedSup customer population was more digital than my IFP population. I'm like, hey guys, are these customers like the same? So I had to I had my favorite quote from one of my customers that literally came out of our opinion lab on digital. And it said, I may be old, but I'm not stupid. Please allow me to play with my credit card. Like, literally. And I put that quote like in front of executives, and it just had so much power. She didn't say the word stupid, but I had to downplay it, right? Because it was not, a G-rated word for airtime.
All right, I want to cover off a couple of things that you just mentioned, Sarah Kay, and I want to tie them back to the conversation that Prabha and I were having. When you think about line of business focused versus member focused, right? This is the core problem that I think we're getting at here. When Prabha identified the 3 primary call drivers, which, by the way, all of the research we've done, all the research that we've seen from analysts, those are among the top 5 call drivers, period. She didn't mention that it was the large group plan people that were driving all of the identifying my provider questions. She didn't say that it was MedSup or Medicare that had all the benefit inquiries. No. Member's a member, right? And if members are having all the same questions around all of the lines of business, why do we keep looking at this through that lens of line of business? That's exactly why we have 3, 7, 10, 12 of everything. We get to the 12 because of acquisition, because, we bought this thing that had the same line of business and we couldn't figure out how to end of life it without the lights turning out or whatever. But that focus of line of business versus member is, I think, a core issue behind the cost drivers and the abysmal member experience that we have in healthcare versus every other industry.
I couldn't agree more. And that's where my role has changed and added just more fun in it. And I now am responsible for all of our health plan correspondence across Blue Shield. Because if you think about it, a correspondent is no different across how it shows up to a member, but we segment them, not only by line of business, by system, by solutions, by teams, by data set, by process flow. I wish I only had 12 of many things, John, but I think I have like 380 ways to get a letter out the door. I think I literally have about 380 ways. And that is insane if you think about it, because there's a variance in every single letter versus dynamicness, which we actually built with you guys in SmartComms when we fixed our billing and our letter process. We made dynamic structure. We took what was 119 templates and made them 9 and said, I don't need 100 and plus ways to say, here's your bill, here's your late bill, here's your warning bill, here's your final bill, here's your, like, we just didn't need all the colors and bezazzlement because it was the same stuff. And when we did that, we saved a lot of money. And it was all in because, again, we looked at it holistically. What is it from a system perspective? By the way, we PDF these things. We store them on our digital archives because, record retention laws and the fear of compliance, our back end costs. I always say, I'm sorry, I like kind of music. So I'm always like, baby's got back is my little rap I'll throw in there. Cause that's me telling my boss, like, we've got a big rear end of just sunken costs that don't make sense. I have to have fun in my job, guys. It's just the way that I flow. Because processes to me are great opportunities and so are problems. And when you put them together and say, hey, sure, I can go about this and I can go solve it for a line of business and I can make sure that line of business is compliant. But I promise you, if I'm under this hood, there's other points of deviation in the experience. It's quicker, better, cheaper for me to take compliance as my starting point, but then to build that experience layer in because you're already there. You're already touching code. You already have your teams. You already know what's broken. You already have the passion. You have everything that you need. You may need to buy a couple more weeks because if you do it right and you do it agile, you're not asking for people to wait 12, 18 months. And I wish that I could operate under, a 5 or whatever year return. I actually, in my world, I'm returning money 1.2 years on average is my return rate in transformation. 1.2. And that's good, which is why finance is willing to show up with us and say, hey, I have a great idea. Here's the capital. Can you help me raise this? Can you do this? Because I have all the stakeholders and they all understand the process. They all understand their costs. Advantage, I grew up in corporate finance, so I absolutely understand how to run with the business case with the best of them. But if you don't have a business believer in the team that's leading the business, you have a leadership problem, right? If every leader in the organization, and I've done this, I say, okay, your processes are perfect, right? They're fully automated. You're using AI. You have no compliance risk or issues. You have the best unit costs. You have no open caps. You have no unsatisfactory audit. And they're like, oh, well, no, well, then let's have a conversation, right? And let's bring all those things into the pockets to say, what are we trying to do to make it easy for our customers? Period. Easy equals retention. Easy all day, every day. Twice on Tuesday.
100%. And I think that process.
So I'd like to, can I just compliment you on the fact when you said, take those extra few days or few weeks to solve for a more expanded problem, because that's right. It's like whenever we work with organizations, it's easy enough to say, I have a project and I'm only going to do that one piece. Versus saying, what is the project enabling? And if it's an experience, where are the other related pieces that we can do? And it doesn't have to be like you do everything and the kitchen sink, but bundling and making things flow better actually then result in savings in the long run. But more importantly, make the experience so much better versus
you may be doing 5 things different directions, Prabha, too, right? Like, I don't know how many times I've seen one project trying to pull someone left, another one trying to pull them right, another one doing a loop-de-loop. Yes. And I'm like, whoa. All these things cannot be true and go live at the same time because someone has to air traffic control and protect and really govern the change for the experience. Someone has to. Our regulators don't have it right, and it's okay. Blue Shield has challenged regulators. We've been successful in some instances in saying, hey, Cover Cal, I get you want to do that, but look how horrible the experience will be. And when you lead with the experience, your regulators are more behind you. I mean, it makes no sense that Medicare allows me to digitize bills and digitize touch points and digitize EOBs, but I have to mail an ID card no matter what the preference is. Like, this makes zilch sense. but that's the regulation. So to really drive digital first, what we have to do is say, let's make that digital experience so remarkable besides a carbon copy of the paper experience. And that's what a lot of it is. They're carbon copied. And when you're carbon copying paper and you're putting on the web, you're not saving money. You're not deflecting calls. You're not driving retention. You're not driving anything. And I can only take paper down to so transparent and cheap to where it rips apart, rips apart in the production line. So you have to do both. And we're driving towards a digital experience that is so great that I'll give you a paper compliant experience, but I'm gonna make it minimal paper, minimal viable, and it's gonna get through that compliance line literally by the skin of my teeth every single day, because I'm not gonna spend so much money on an analog 8-track anymore. I'm gonna spend all that money on digitizing that experience and making it better, because that's where the real benefit is.
Yeah, and I think that process, right? That common denominator across lines of business is a great start. You had a quote, Sarah Kay, lines of business only matter when they have to. And I think that's a great way to look at the operations of a health plan, right? Don't think of it as the lowest common denominator. Just think of it as the common denominator. You, Sarah Kay, have had a lot of success, likely tied to that, 1.2 year return on investment, pitching for funding even when budgets are tight. You have kind of a recipe for success. It's gathering stakeholders around the problem. It's standardizing how we operationalize, how we touch members. You gave some examples before about bills not looking like bills, and you had a very high touch process. It was something like a very high percentage agent assisted process to pay bills. Now you're down to less than 1%. When you're looking at what's coming next, what project are you looking to add value to the organization? It's not all member facing stuff that you're involved in. It's sort of some of the indirect member related things. What process is in focus right now for you?
So, you know me, I like a good challenge. So, let's go after appeals and grievances. They're huge, they're expensive, and they are, I would say, just one of those things that makes you go, why? Like, why do they even exist? So you can go and challenge yourself and say, what can I do to improve my process to make appeals and grievance volumes go down, blah, blah, blah. And you're going to just be chasing your tail for a scotch. Or you can say, hey, appeals and grievances, look at the climate of the environment, look at everything. Everyone's out there, trying to fight their right and their way through. These are probably only going to increase. So accept it as a norm and say, what can I do to make the process better? So we've already worked on an automation process. I've done a lot of back-end automation. My Medicare enrollment automation is completely hands-off as an example. I have hired 0 temps in open enrollment in AEP period, which has been true for over 3, and we're in our 4th open enrollment period in AEP that is true. So we know we can do some grassroots backbone stuff. It integrates with our front-end customer care teams. So we said, let's go do this for appeals and grievances. It can't be that complicated. So we've been doing a lot of out-of-the-box building with our automation partner, and that's process flow 1. Then I said, well, there's this horrible process of agent-generated letters and appeals and grievances that always the time is, against their head. They're literally, you have people running to the post office to get a postmark, to get something, literally post-dated that day for appeals to meet a compliance deadline. Like, this cannot be a great work environment. So can we make that better? So John, that's working with you and a couple others to say, let's make our automated workflow trigger the actual letter, and let's use things like AI and automated assistant engines to pre-draft that letter based upon the case, based upon the research, and give that agent the assist to say, keep the agent in the loop, right? The humans in the loop to accept the recommended changes, understand the tone, the sentiment. And now I get data. I have 0 data on these letters today. Now I understand the tone, the sentiment. I can see if that letter, charged a callback. I can tell how that, I can actually see the letter on the portal, which today I cannot do because they're all manually generated. I can understand so much more. So we're keeping everything there to make sure it's compliant. So the backend workflow is built, we're building the pipes, and then we're going to build the translation, language, and part of it is a phase 2 to say, and let's also translate these in on demand, which is not what we do today. Post-composition translations is expensive and so late. Like, cool, wait 30, 45 days to get the thing you want in the language you desired. I do not understand how that's customer centric. But hey, the bar's pretty low on that one, so we can raise the roof and absolutely change it. But again, this is by having a good stakeholder, by really, looking at a problem. I don't know how many times our appeals have showed up and then boom, there's a cap, boom, there's a finding, boom. There's all these like other things that happen as a sign of certain appeals. Then you find out what's broken. Imagine I can get that data faster now versus waiting for a regulator to tell me it's broken. That's the advantage of automating this process upstream.
100%. And one of the cool things you'll be able to do in that process is you can actually A/B test your language, right?
Yep.
We think this is going to really move the needle, but this other one might do the trick too. Let's try to A/B test this and see which ones drive less calls or actually result in fewer overturned decisions. We have 5 minutes left. I want to turn this back over to John, our moderator. I know that we have a few questions that have come in. John, what do you have for us?
Thank you, John. Yeah, it is time for today's Q&A portion. If you still have not submitted a question yet, you can do so right now on that submit questions panel on your screen. First question, when you are considering consolidation of vendors and or providers to improve efficiencies, handoffs, etc., how do you select your preferred provider or vendor? Is there an RFP evaluation or other method?
Ooh, I think, Sarah Kay, why don't you tackle that one first, because you've actually gone through one of those processes very recently. And then, Prabha, if you can maybe provide some color for other payers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a favorite vendor, and John won't take any offense to that because I'm all about the solution and longevity. So we have a multi-pronged RFP in the marketplace to solve a lot of our letter generation. And I'm actually flipping the tape and the script. I'm actually trying to pull information and data from our vendors and in-source and in-house our template and composition development, which today we do not do, which is why that line of business sunken cost model is pretty exorbitant. If you think about it, if you send an XML JSON data file to a vendor and you do not see any image before, and then boom, you get an image out the door, buried in your cost is all that composition, all that data layer. So I'm looking for partners who are not going to say, well, as your digital rates go up, your costs for me go up. We're looking for digital first provider aligned partners who are really in it to win it. And there's some new ones that are in the healthcare, that are trying to get in the healthcare space. They're hungry. Hunger's a gift. Some players that have been doing it for a really long time and haven't changed their way, there's a reason. So I just, really check those references, really dive in, give them a hard problem. And, right now I'm trying before I buy. I'm working on 2 vendor pilots actually testing, PHI-free data to say, hey, I'm going to go shake up what I have. But to do that, I better be freaking ready, right? To make sure I got a really strong contender. So having a good partnership with your sourcing team and your IT team will help you also stand up some ways to kind of prove your value. We don't do proof of concept, we do proof of value to ensure that everything you're looking for works. But RFPs, we have it all. So.
Okay.
I think, Sarah, your example was fantastic. So the only thing I would add to that is, and it's almost a recommendation, right? Always always understand what your third-party partners, and I would call them, whether they're vendors or partners, what else have they developed? Because every organization, right, is adding capabilities. And, there are new ones in the mix. You should always consider them. But I guess my message is, just because you signed a contract doesn't mean it's good forever, right? It is upon you as the business owner to evaluate when is the right time to look at it and consider, are there different ways and better ways to doing it? And fewer vendors you have in your ecosystem, the easier it is for you to run your business. So consolidation is good.
Amen.
Excellent. I'm not sure we have time for one more question, but I'll just put it out to you guys. Is there anything else you'd like to add here before we wrap up?
Ladies?
I would like to say thanks, for the time. Apologies that I couldn't be on camera. We have a lot going on. If any of my, fellow plans ever want to connect, I know you guys have our information. I have to keep everything, of course, as you know, at a very cryptic level for said sessions. But the industry is broken. It's fractured. Right now the pump is primed. So I think we can, leave this place better than we found it, right? Because it absolutely needs an overhaul.
Amen.
Yeah. I would echo that, really appreciate the opportunity to talk. And I agree. I find our place in this industry in this time is, making a difference and making that transformation. And we have the tools, we have the people, and we have the right mindset to do it. We have to get to it and do the work.
I'm just going to say thank you, co-panelists, to you, John, and to Fierce, and for all of the attendees. We appreciate all of the questions. We'll make sure we get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Excellent, John. Thank you. And that is all the time we have for today. If we were not able to answer your question, once again, we'll do our best to follow up following the webinar today. As a reminder, a recording of this session will be available on demand within 24 hours. Once again, thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Take care.